Hey, Phantom fans, you're watching Chronicle Chamber. My name is Scott, and today we are talking about Phantom 2040, A New Shadow, Episode 4, Heir Apparent. If you've been following our reviews or reading this series on your own, you'll know that our main protagonist for this new iteration of Phantom 2040 is a man by the name of Carlos Oserio. He's a disgraced soccer player. He is working at a media company, filming soccer events and keeping his head down. In past episodes, we've been introduced to his friend Mel. We've seen that the big bad is a tech billionaire by the name of Charles Tyrus, and we know the real Phantom, even though he's kind of disappeared from the public eye and is presumed to no longer exist, is still out there in the world today. And so this episode picks up at the end of the last episode where Mel and Carlos are headed to Charles Tyrus's, big special event where he's going to announce a new thing he found in the ghost jungle, which is located somewhere in the American Southwest. We know it's, near Walker's Table because Walker's Table was mentioned last episode. So, we start off right off the bat with, a cool introduction to this episode. I actually like that for this episode, we have to scroll down. We're kind of descending down into the depths of this dystopian, city. And so Carlos and Mel are headed to this event. Mel gets in with her pass. Carlos is, right behind her. And he gets stopped by this guard who's like, "Hey, I know you. You're that soccer guy that totally blew a match." Um, he doesn't have credentials that get him past. What I actually like about this panel too is this art from John Amor. Something he's really good at in this series is the neon lights, and kind of making this dim and dark dystopian very colorful. And so I love this image of this hand blocking Carlos's face, and then we have this like, teal, light blue neon cascading across through the fingertips across the face. That is probably my favorite panel in this episode. But something different happens this episode. So in the past couple, the characterization of Carlos is he's really keeping his head down. He is no longer the, you know, um, soccer star who's kind of the front man leading the charge that he used to be. He's put that all away and he's just trying to get by, punch in, punch out. Mel is, reminding him in the last episode of who he used to be and how he used to stand up to bullies. And, he was a really big fan of the Phantom and how he looked up to the Phantom. And so, we get almost like a character 180 here. Right off the bat, this guy stops him. And so he calls the guy a bench warmer. And, it provokes a fight. So, Carlos dodges. And one of the things I love, actually, I should go back to that, is this dodge is cast in purple. And I like this because this is a little foreshadowing. We know Carlos at some point is going to be the new Phantom. So we get this purple panel, it's right in your face. It's kind of cool, and he's just breezing by and then he, knocks this guy over, sending him right in the air. But it's kind of interesting because if you're reading these and you're reading them week to week as they're coming out, you get that break in between. So it's almost jarring to see Carlos go from that head down, not make any waves kind of person to, just beating up a security guard just to get into this event and hang out with his friend Mel. When I think about like the conversations they had, I can see where like Alex Segura and Michael Moreci, the writers on the story, got that from. They've been trying to lay these pieces to where he would make the switch and become who he was and kind of be more action oriented and rebel a little bit. But, at the same time, since, it's been, we've had a week in between issues, we forget that that's where this is leading to. We're used to Carlos, who's like, nah, I don't really want to go. I don't think that's a good idea. And here he is, kicking that to the curb. So before any more guys can jump on the bus and start trying to attack Carlos, Mel threatens to film them all, which gets them to back off. So maybe kind of convenient, but it pushes us to, where we're trying to go. We're trying to get to this event where, tech magnate Charles Tyrus is, going to unveil his big finding in the ghost jungle. And so this, it gets to probably my least favorite part of this episode, but also something I think is a little bit of a problem with this, series so far as a whole. It's like the one complaint I have, and that's you can see it right here. We have this orange text. This is Carlos talking. He's describing Charles Tyrus. It's the typical tech billionaire taking stuff for themselves, breaking the law, pillaging the earth, that kind of spiel that, it's not new, it's not reinventing the wheel, but it's also not harmful. My problem is, we don't, we haven't met Charles yet for himself. We've seen him on TV, and he's making this big announcement, but we haven't like formally met him. And I feel like the scene we needed to come first is him doing an action himself that paints him in a bad light, him being a bad guy, whether it's hurting someone, stealing from someone, breaking the law or pillaging the land. We need to see it and not be told it. And the hard thing with it is like Carlos here, his whole monologue about these people, obviously Charles Tyrus is kind of a embodiment of Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Larry Ellison, those tech billionaires who are kind of playing with the world right now. And it's a vessel for, people's anger at those types of people, and so that plays well. You can see that it's tapping into the vein of kind of the zeitgeist of how people feel about, these billionaires. But as a storytelling element, it's not as exciting as it could be. And so, after Carlos gives this monologue, him and Mel talk it out. She plays a little bit of devil's advocate, basically saying, he owns this, so he can drill it, not to give him a pass. But before that really can continue, Charles Tyrus comes out. We see him standing out. We see his back first, this light, and this audience. They almost look like robots or puppets standing out here in front. And this is where, maybe this scene is what we needed first. I know it doesn't make sense. We'd have to rework, the other scene, but this is where I kind of like this speech from Charles Tyrus, and this is where the episode won me back. Here he is talking about, you know, uh, we live in a dark world. He's clutching his chest. He's looking down and sadly, almost like he's like feigning some kind of martyr figure, here. And he's talking about how, he's lived a privileged life and that he's been able to do great things, but that, also secretly he knows he is destined for something special. And so this is the kind of egotism and egomania I think we needed first. We needed it from the horse's mouth, because I love this because you could see this guy is totally full of himself. And obviously Mel is channeling what we're all feeling, but he goes on, about his big finding that he wants to do to help reinvigorate the world. And it's completely self-centered, which is kind of funny, it adds a little humor when you think about it, and that basically what he found here is, here's the big shock and the big reveal, the Phantom suit out in the ghost jungle. And what is he going to do with it? He's going to be the Phantom. And so, it's kind of funny when you think about it. The world, we know from the Phantom 2040 cartoon that there's a climate crisis. The world is a dystopian nightmare. Those things translated over to a new shadow. It's the same here. We see either these big sweeping cityscapes like we were introduced to in the beginning of this episode, or the desert, the dry, arid desert. We get one of two things here. We don't really get much else in this series so far. And here's this guy who's like, everything's dark and hopeless, but I'm going to go be the Phantom. And so people are asking for an interview, and he's just talking about how we can do this together, meaning himself, and they can watch. And so this is when we circle back to Carlos tapping into what we're all feeling. He's saying right here, people are starving, and the rich white dude is on the hunt for his new Halloween costume, question mark. Really tapping into that cultural zeitgeist there. It's just not done in a way that propels us forward in, with excitement, and that's the hard thing with this series is, I am curious to see where this goes. We know from the first episode that the Phantom and Carlos are going to meet. Carlos is also going to steal this suit and run with it. We know from the last episode that Carlos is a huge Phantom fan. He was even reading Phantom comic books in a flashback. So, we have this cool ending panel of him in the Phantom's, eye mask right here, reflected. And it's he's going to be the new Phantom, so it's got layers. He's also going to steal this suit, so it's him, angry. He's thinking about it. So this is a cool point to end on. But there's just, there needs to be something a little more to like propel this forward. I feel like, to get us, to really get us like scrolling and for lack of a better word, turning the page. And so that's really the downside of this series so far is we don't have the driving action. It's been very dialogue heavy these last few episodes, but hopefully now that like our characters are established, we finally got to meet the villain, and Carlos is already changing his personality. We're going to get that oomph and that injection of, adventure that we're kind of craving as Phantom fans here. So we'll see what next week brings. Um, if you want more Phantom 2040 reviews, you can visit chroniclechamber.com or check out the Chronicle Chamber YouTube channel. If you want more Phantom news, reviews, our Expand the Phantom podcast, you can also check out Chronicle Chamber on either of those two channels there. If you want to hear more from me personally, you can find me at scottwaldenwrites.com or on Threads, Instagram, or Blue Sky at Writer Scott. Otherwise, I will see you guys next time where we talk Phantom 2040: A New Shadow, Episode 5.